Hey, welcome everyone. Glad that you are here. So happy to be with you on this gray, drizzly, rainy Portland day, where we all need church like extra on these days. So I'm glad you're here. My name is Jesse, and I also just wanted to say, by the way, you might have noticed, but Sabrina and Tyler are expecting their first child. Pretty exciting. And next week happens to be Mother's Day. And so I just want to invite you out. We're going to have a couple special things. Maybe your mom lives around. Maybe she's like really happy you go to church, or maybe she's not. Maybe she doesn't, go to church herself. But in any case, I want to invite you to bring your mom here next Sunday because we're going to celebrate the moms, express some gratitude, including the moms-to-be, the moms who are, going to be having a little baby sooner or later. But yeah, we're going to celebrate the moms next week. Just want to invite you out. We're kicking off a new series this morning called IRL. And this is a little, short acronym you see around the internet. I probably don't need to explain it too much, but maybe you're like DMing with somebody on Instagram. You got like a friend you made on social, or maybe it's somebody on Tinder. It's somebody you've been like sliding into their DMs, or you've been swiping right, or whatever on Bumble or Hinge. I mean, there's so many of these apps. Or it could just be a Zoom colleague. Maybe it's somebody you're stuck in these boring Zoom meetings all day, and they live on the other side of the planet because you work for like some big corporation that has all of these remote employees. But isn't it so interesting when you finally meet up with one of these people, IRL, when you meet up in real life? It's always really surprising to me. A lot of you know that we're part of this thing called Orchard. Some of you maybe don't know this, but we're part of this church plant organization. It's very, very amazing organization that specializes in planting churches in cities. And we did a lot of our assessment process to become part of Orchard, and they've planted churches in New York and Chicago and Tokyo and literally in Istanbul and Lagos, Nigeria, but they specialize in cities. And it was just such an interesting experience because we did a lot of our assessment with them over Zoom because it was the end of COVID. And so we're doing all this online. And then I started meeting some of these guys, and it was so shocking to me to discover what they were like in person. Like some of them I thought they were little guys because like the angle of their camera. But then I picked them up at PDX, and I was like, whoa, you are huge. You are like a Viking man. And we actually have one of those guys here today. My homie Mike Winger is here today, and he is a physical specimen, let me just say. Like the camera did not do him justice. This guy, he is just, he's something to behold, Watch out, everybody. But anyways, we're extremely thankful for all of our Orchard partners, specifically Mosaic out in Maryland. My family and I, we got to go and visit them last summer. It was amazing. Yeah, but anyways, you meet someone in person, and it's interesting, going from the digital to the physical, going from just knowing someone on a screen or maybe even just in texts, and then actually, whoa, here you are in person. Hopefully you don't get catfished. Hopefully you don't get like scammed or fooled. Little children should not go meet people IRL. Like, no, parents, prevent that keep them out of the chat rooms. It is not safe out there. It's a dangerous world. But what we're doing in this series is we're kind of saying, throughout the Old Testament, in a way, God was kind of remote. He was like a remote God. I mean, he had appeared in different ways to Moses and the burning bush and these different encounters. But in a lot of ways, people wondered what God was like. And not only in Israel, but throughout human history. People have wondered if there is a God. People have wondered if there is one, what is that God like? What is his character? What is his heart? What is his nature? Is he a capricious and cruel and ruthless God? Or is he a kind and caring God? Or is he a distant God and an impersonal God who's not even anything like us in having emotions or feelings? Is it just some force? People have wondered all throughout human history what God is like. And the New Testament authors have the audacity to say that when you look in the face of this human being named Jesus of Nazareth, you are looking into the face of God. That Jesus is God IRL. And that's what the Gospels are about. And so what we're doing in this series, we're going to look at 10 face-to-face encounters where Jesus has up close and personal visits with people from all different social classes, people from all different backgrounds. We're going to be looking at 10 of them as we finish up the spring on into the summer. This week, as I was preparing, I asked ChatGPT who the most famous person in human history is. I said, ChatGPT, who's the most famous human being to ever live? And very quickly, because it's amazing how fast these little AI bots write you back, but they said unhesitatingly, Jesus Christ is the most famous person in human history. He was number one on the list. Even ChatGPT knows that. And it did say, this is subjective, there are different views, but it gave a list of 10 people. Some of the other people on the list of 10 were the Prophet Muhammad, there was Albert Einstein, there was Mahatma Gandhi, among others. But what's pretty fascinating is that the Prophet Muhammad, Albert Einstein, and Gandhi, and some of the other guys on the list as well, they all tip their hat to Jesus. Every single last one of them. Muhammad, the Quran mentions Jesus 93 times. Gandhi was highly influenced by Leo Tolstoy, who was obsessed with Jesus, who was obsessed with the Sermon on the Mount. Every single one of these people. Here's a quote by Albert Einstein. As a child, I received instruction both in the Bible and in the Talmud. That's the Old Testament. That's really, the Old Testament. I am a Jew, but I am enthralled by the luminous figure of the Nazarene. No one can read the Gospels without feeling the actual presence of Jesus. His personality pulsates in every word. No myth is filled with such life. Basically, everyone on the list of 10 pays homage to the OG, pays homage to Jesus. It's kind of like Jay-Z, dropping a little lyric in about Biggie or Pac. It's like some indie band that references some Beatles lyrics. Like, you can't even play the game without referencing the original. And you can't even understand human history without understanding Jesus. Now, there is a vocal minority who try to claim that Jesus wasn't a historical figure, but I want you to know they are in the utter minority even of secular scholars. Even secular historians, they acknowledge Jesus was a real person who was crucified under Pontius Pilate. And want to know how we know that? We don't have to go to Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. We know this from external historians from the ancient world. Josephus, Tacitus, Suetonius, Lucian, Marbar Seraphian, Pliny the Younger, the Talmud, Celsus, Thales. We have the early church fathers like Clement of Rome who lived in the first century. We have so much external corroboration that there is literally zero doubt that Jesus was a historical figure. And if you choose to throw Jesus out as a historical figure, you basically have to throw out every other thing we know about ancient history, because the criteria that he meets is so high. Now, here's a quote by a theologian, Henry Bosch, that I really like. Socrates taught for 40 years. Plato for 50. Aristotle taught for 40. But Jesus only for 3. Yet the influence of Christ's 3-year ministry infinitely transcends the impact left by the combined 130 years of teaching from these other men who were among the greatest philosophers of all antiquity. Jesus painted no pictures, yet some of the finest paintings of Raphael, Michelangelo, and Leonardo da Vinci received their inspiration from him. Jesus wrote no poetry, yet Dante, Milton, and scores of great poets were inspired by him. Jesus composed no music. Still, Handel, Beethoven, Bach, Mozart, Mendelssohn reached their highest performance of melody in their symphonies and oratories that they composed in his praise. Every sphere of life has been enriched by this humble carpenter from Nazareth. So I want to invite you to take the next 10 weeks to look on him. You can't even, maybe you're not a believer. Maybe you are an utter skeptic. And we started this church, as I often say, as a place to welcome skeptics. And one of the things that I love about Counterculture is that there actually are always, if not often, if not always, there are skeptical people in the services and in our dinner parties and in the things that we do, and we love that. That's how we want it. But maybe you are a skeptical person and you're unsure of Jesus. Well, I just want to say this. You really can't even understand human history unless you understand Jesus. So it's worth your time to look at him, to look at this figure, this luminous figure who has, even ChatGPT knows he's a big deal. All right, so the first thought that I want to pull out from the text that Sabrina read to us is that Jesus moves in action. You might have noticed that at the beginning of the chapter, it says Jesus was coming down the mountain. Want to know what mountain that is? That's a mountain on the Lake of Galilee, and that's the Sermon on the Mount. He's just given the Sermon on the Mount, one of the most influential compositions of human history, where we get words like salt of the earth, the light of the world, blessed are the peacemakers, judge not lest you be judged. Things like do unto others, love your enemies. Things like the Lord's Prayer. I mean, some of the most famous lines within the English language and really within virtually almost any language on the earth, some of the most influential lines that have ever been spoken, completely famous, come from the Sermon on the Mount. But Matthew, as he's depicting Jesus as the fulfillment of the Jewish scriptures, he chooses immediately after this just stunning, staggering sermon to put 3 acts of power. And what he's trying to say is he's saying Jesus isn't simply a man of word. He's a man of deed. He has the acts to back it up. He doesn't just simply have a powerful vision for his kingdom. He has action. And that's what Matthew wants to convey to us. That immediately coming down from the mountain, giving this breathtaking speech, giving this breathtaking sermon, he says he has 3 acts of power. And we're looking at the first one. But isn't that what many people want to know about Christianity? Isn't that what many people in Portland want to know about the church? I mean, don't people want to see that it's not just our lips, but our lives? You know, aren't there many people in our city who wonder, is church even good for society? I remember when we were starting Counterculture and we kind of let the word out. I like to say that our marketing campaign was basically just rolling out a welcome mat. We were just trying to roll out a welcome mat to the city, but we got, a certain amount of backlash. And I remember people, what do you really think a church is going to do for the city of Portland? And I could devote a lot of time to answering that question, but I just want to start off by saying this. There are a lot of churches that are known for their great worship music, and that's wonderful. There are a lot of churches that are known for their great preaching, their great teaching, and obviously I devote a lot of time and energy into that. But what my prayer more than anything is that Counterculture would be known as a church that does acts. That does acts in the city, that we take action to address the struggles that our city is facing. That is my prayer, that we would be known for that we would be known both collectively and individually as people who do things to be the light of the world, to be people of love, who love our neighbors, who love our enemies, who care for the poor, who care for the vulnerable, who care for the downtrodden. And that's why we prioritize so much partnering with other organizations who have expertise in the areas of foster care, who have expertise in the areas of human trafficking and houselessness and addiction recovery. And it's my prayer that collectively we would be known for that, but not just collectively. I also want to pose a challenge that we would follow Jesus' example in being people of action and that we would do it individually. That we'd go into our neighborhoods, we'd go into our workplaces, that we'd go just into the city in general and the coffee shops we visit, the businesses that we go to, and that we'd be known as people of love who do tangible good for others. There was a period in my life not too long ago where during the COVID pandemic, I had a big disruption in my career. It was related to the pandemic. But I ended up getting a job at a nice restaurant. I was working at a nice restaurant in Albuquerque. I'd been in ministry for about 11 years, but due to the pandemic, I had to go get a job, and I had to sell avocado toast and mimosas. And some of you are like, that sounds great. That sounds lovely, But and it was, I didn't even really want to have a disruption in my career, but the pandemic just had made that happen to millions of people. And but in that situation, I thought to myself, you know what? I guess now's my chance to live all the stuff I've been preaching. Now's my chance to actually do it, to roll up my sleeves. And, I didn't do it perfectly, and I'm not, pretending like I'm some saint or anything like that in the, superlative sense. But I did my best to live it out, by covering coworkers' shifts and by working hard and by having a good attitude and really trying to go above and beyond. My wife and I, we looked for ways that when people I worked with were in need, we went above and beyond to go visit them when they were sick, to bring them gifts, to give people rides, to be the person that you could count on and says, you know what, when I can't make it to work, who I know will cover for me? Jesse will cover for me. And that's my prayer, that's my desire, is that all of us would be those kinds of people. That collectively, as a church, through our partnerships, through our organizations, through going out to serve, and individually, we would be the kind of people who are known not just for our words, but for our deeds. Okay, so Jesus moves in action. Our next thought is Jesus moves in compassion. Now, to really understand this story, you have to understand the social context of what it would be like to be a first century Jew. And being a first century Jew, they're in the law of Moses, and I'll just keep this concise, but basically, God had his presence with man. Man said, hey, screw you, God, we don't want to be with your presence. And they were banished from the Garden of Eden. And then as the Bible unfolds, God kind of puts this miniature Garden of Eden, because if you look at the tabernacle, that's the temple. Most people probably at least heard of the temple from Judaism, right? The temple, it looks like a mini Garden of Eden. There's all these murals and flowers and all of these different things. God puts this mini Garden of Eden in the tabernacle and the temple, and it's the author of life, and he's putting his presence there amongst the Jews. But anything that is a reminder of death, anything that's a reminder of defilement, anything that's a reminder of sickness is left outside the camp. And God's ultimate plan, as we see in Jesus, and we even see later on in the Old Testament, is to redeem all of the brokenness and redeem all of the people on the outside, but they're left on the outside. And so here's a guy with leprosy. And according to Leviticus chapter 13, he was not only left outside the temple, but anyone who had these skin diseases, these horrible lesions on their body, this horrible, painful disease, partly just for the purpose of not letting a contagion spread throughout the camp. Lepers, both in Israel and actually in a lot of societies in India today and other parts of the world today, lepers are still left on the outside. But this guy had what's called Hansen's disease. It's possible he had a different skin ailment, but Hansen's disease is particularly awful because in addition to it infecting your skin and just having painful lesions all over your body, it would also destroy your ability to feel physical touch and sensation. And so you would sometimes reach something hot and you'd burn yourself, you wouldn't even know it. You would sometimes smash your hand in a door, you wouldn't even feel it. And so they would sometimes lose appendages, sometimes lose, noses and ears. And then above all, worse than all of that, both in Israel and in other cultures and other parts of the world, they were social outcasts. And in Leviticus, they'd have to yell, unclean, unclean, and they'd have to live complete and utter isolation. So here comes this leper who's not only in physical agony, but he's also in social humiliation and social isolation and social agony. And he comes and he falls at Jesus' feet. And it's really fascinating because it's possible that it's been 1, 2, 3, maybe 10 years, maybe, who knows, maybe 20 years since anyone has touched him. Nobody's touched him. And science will tell us that physical touch is incredibly important to your well-being. That if a baby doesn't receive physical touch, the baby will not thrive, the baby won't even live. That people who are in the hospital, who don't get visitors, and they have no one who touches them, they die. They don't last as long. That if you receive physical touch, you recover better from surgeries. Oh man, I apologize. Could anyone hook me up with a little cup of water or something? So sorry about this. I feel like I'm always sick. Thank you. Sorry about that. Exactly. No, he gets it. That's fantastic. That's why we have you, Zach. That's why we need you. But yeah, so physical touch is incredibly important, right? It's actually been shown that you will recover more quickly from a surgery if you have physical touch. And this is part of the reason why, oh, thanks, man. Now I got double the water. You going to swap me? Or I don't know what's going to happen. This is getting crazy. All right. So, and this is why we actually value in-person church services. You know, there's nothing wrong with podcasts. There's nothing wrong with, catching the sermon. And I never, ever, ever want people to come to church out of like guilt or pressure. That's horrible. That's the opposite of what we're about. But sincerely, why we value in-person church is because we need that hug. We need that handshake. We need that physical touch. A lot of the things that we take for granted are actually incredibly good for you. They're like just incredibly good. But this man's not received any physical touch in who knows how long. But it's fascinating. When he comes up to Jesus, he does not come up to him and say, I know you're willing, but can you heal me? I know you want to, but are you able to? He doesn't say that. What does he say? If you look down in the passage in verse 2, he says, Lord, if you are willing, I know you can make me clean. Isn't that interesting? He doesn't go, if you're able to, I know that you're willing. No, he says the opposite. He knows Jesus is able to. He believes that he's the Messiah. He believes he's an individual of tremendous power. And earlier on in Matthew, he had already been healing people in Galilee. But it's interesting. He wants to know if he's willing. This is a question of Jesus' character. Does he care? You know what I think the reason why he's asking that is because nobody cared about lepers. Nobody cared. The only thing they wanted was to keep them as far away as possible. And he's been living so long in utter isolation. And maybe you're here this morning. Maybe you're a part of a people group, a community. Maybe you have something in your past, something in your history. Maybe it could be mental illness. It could be anything. It could be a choice that you made, a lifestyle pattern. Maybe you're here and you're wondering, does anybody care? Does anyone matter? Is anyone willing? But I love the way Jesus answers. He says, I am willing. And he touches him. And here's a man who's not been touched in who knows how long. And what does Jesus do? Maybe you're wondering what the character of God is. Matthew is telling you that the character of the God who made the universe is the kind of character of someone who reaches out and touches lepers, who touches the isolated, who touches the outcast, who touches the excluded, and says, I'm willing, be made clean. Look at Mark 1:41. I love this. Then Jesus, moved with compassion, stretched out his hand and touched him and said, I'm willing, be cleansed. Jesus moves in compassion. He stretches out his hand and he touched him. Just in the Sermon on the Mount, he had said, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, right? It's the Lord's Prayer. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. He also says later in the Sermon on the Mount, hey, there's going to be fakes. There's going to be phony Christians, false prophets, false teachers, wolves in sheep's clothing. Not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will inherit the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father. How do you combine this all together? The will of the Father is that we would be the kind of people who touch lepers. The will, doing God's will on earth as it is in heaven, is being the kind of people who say, I'm willing, be cleansed. The kind of people who reach out our hands to the broken parts of our city, to the broken parts of our world in compassion. Says, I'm willing. But compassion is very interesting there. And Mark, I always think it's super helpful to understand how revolutionary and groundbreaking Jesus was. Because we go, oh, compassion, we all love compassion. Good for Jesus, he's compassionate. Hey, check this out from Seneca, one of the most influential philosophers of the time. It is only weak eyes which weep in sympathy. To show pity is the mark of a weak character, and one which a good man will avoid. Like many, if not most traditional societies, they had a warrior ethic, an ethic of strength and honor, an ethic of honor and shame. And Stoicism, it valued suppressing your emotions. That person is weak probably because they deserve it. Within the Hindu culture, within the caste system, right? You're an untouchable, you're a leper, you're at the bottom of society. It's because of your karma. Nobody should show you any concern. You deserve that miserable life you had because something you did in a previous life or in this life. And that's how many ancient societies and traditional societies functioned. Plato, a poor man who's no longer able to work because of sickness should be left to die. So in that kind of culture, in the kind of culture where lepers had to live on the outskirts and stay unclean, where among the Greeks, they would say, hey, a sick man should be left to die. Don't waste your time on them. But what does Christianity do as it bursts out into the ancient world? I'll tell you what it does. Basil the Great, he's a Turkish Christian, and I love it. It's a brother and sister duo. Macrina, a beautiful woman follower of Jesus. What do? In the 4th century, they start the first hospital. The only people who had doctors in the ancient world were rich people, wealthy people. They had some, doctors perhaps for the military. They had military clinics to keep their soldiers going on the battlefield and whatnot. But the idea of everyone having access to a doctor is absurd until Jesus came. And Basil and Macrina started the first hospital in human history, a 300-bed hospital. At the Council of Nicaea, which sometimes gets some bad shade because of association with Constantine, do you know that at the Council of Nicaea, they said anywhere that there's a church, there will be a free hospital. That's what they said at the Council of Nicaea. And within the next 1,000 years, 37,000 monasteries were functioning as hospitals. Have you ever noticed that when you drive around, what are the names of hospitals? Oh, St. Jude's. Oh, Presbyterian. Oh, Adventist. Oh, Providence. Oh, Good Samaritan, right there on 23rd. We're not far from it. Legacy Good Samaritan, Have you ever put, interesting, St. Jude's, St. Michael's, Presbyterian, What's the common denominator here? Jesus. Do you realize Christianity brought medicine to the world? Modern medicine was born as followers of Jesus were leading the charge again, creating antiseptic surgery, clinical teaching, physiology, transplant surgery, the vaccine. They wrote the first medical textbooks. These were Christians. And the legacy continues into our day. Check out this photo. I want to know who the 2014 Time Magazine Person of the Year was? Christian Ebola workers. Christian medical doctors who risked their lives running towards the Ebola virus. And there's more stories, I can't get into all of them, but from Chinese Christians during COVID doing the exact same thing in Wuhan. It's breathtaking. Jesus moves in compassion, and his compassion has had a staggering effect on human history that we benefit from to this day. Our next thought is this. Jesus moves in sacrifice. Jesus moves in sacrifice. In verse 4, it says, "See that you tell no one, but go your way, show yourself to the priest, and offer the gift that Moses commanded as a testimony to them." The other gospel accounts, if you look at them, really talk more about how Jesus told them to tell no one. And this puzzled scholars for time and readers for periods of time, but the real reason was this. They expected the Messiah to be this warrior. They expected the Messiah to come and destroy the Romans and overthrow their oppressors and come with violence and just utterly obliterate the injustice and obliterate the ones who are holding them down in Rome. And Jesus, at one point in the Gospel of John, they try to make Jesus a king. They're so stoked on his miracles that they try to take him by force and forcibly make him their king of this new movement. But Jesus was bringing a different kind of kingdom. It wasn't going to be a kingdom where you make your enemies die. It's a kingdom where you die for your enemies. And so he tells the leper not to tell anyone, but then he tells him to go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift that Moses commanded. Now, if you want to get into it, I know all of your favorite book of the Bible. Let's all say it together, Leviticus, your favorite book of the Bible. But, in the book of Leviticus, if you're new to church, let me just tell you, don't start with the book of Leviticus, okay? You just go to like the Gospel of John or something, I don't know. Just do something, anything but Leviticus. It's a weird one. But there's some great stuff in it. There's some great stuff. And the gift that Moses commanded for a leper who had been cleansed, who had been healed, and we'll explain why it says cleansed instead of healed in just a second. But that if all the lesions are gone, you're healed. I mean, imagine this guy. His body is suddenly healed. His skin becomes smooth and just, he all of a sudden feels loved and accepted. He feels the hand of Jesus on him. He feels the physical touch, the contact that's happening. But he's supposed to go to the temple, and Leviticus 14 says, it's kind of this wild thing. You're supposed to take 2 birds, okay? And then you're supposed to kill one and put it in a jar of water. And then you're supposed to dip the other bird in that water where the dead one had been and then set it free. And I like to think about this because I just have a twisted mind. Like, I'm glad we discontinued this practice because I would not only have needed to go to Bible college, I would also need to go to 4-H. I would need to go to Future Farmers of America. Now, I like to think that there's that one priest, Yaakov, and he lets his birds fly away. He's like, dang it. The bird escapes juggling. I don't know, this is my twisted imagination. It's like, Yaakov, it's the 3rd dove this week, man. But anyhow, I think there's something really significant here because the moment Jesus touched this leper, according to the law of Moses, he would have become ceremonially unclean, where he would have been unable to participate in the worship. So the moment he touches the leper, what happens to him? He becomes unclean. And anyone who's done that, that's how it goes, right? You get contaminated, you get dirty, you get sin on you. But Jesus, it goes the other way around. His holiness is contagious. His righteousness is contagious. His goodness is contagious. Rather than him becoming defiled, but still, to a Jewish reader, they'd read this, go, Jesus was defiled. Maybe there's something to this. Well, here's something that's interesting. Those very priests that the leper is going to do the ceremony with, they're the same priests who are one day going to conspire to execute Jesus. And he knows, in a way, that the more word gets out to these priests, the more he is laying his life on the line. And that is precisely what he means to convey. And that is precisely what was meant to be conveyed, going all the way back to that weird ceremony in the book of Leviticus. That Jesus, he's the bird who loses his life, goes in the water, and then we enter into the waters of baptism. And we're the bird that gets set free. We're the bird that gets to go free because he gives his life in our place. In order for us to be clean, Jesus had to be contaminated. In order for us to be accepted, Jesus had to be rejected. It says that the lepers, they lived outside the camp, but Hebrews tells us that Jesus died outside the city gate. That Jesus died in isolation, that Jesus died in humiliation, that Jesus died cut off so that you and I could be brought in. That's what Jesus was doing. And why is this? Why is this? Because our selfishness, our injustice, our betrayals, our treachery, it has a cost. When we mistreat people, when we treat other human beings like they're expendable, there is a breakdown that happens in society. In the message that the Bible is constantly trying to convey, we don't always like to hear it, but we understand it when we've been wronged, okay? That's where I found to be kind of like the turnkey to understanding holiness and understanding all these things, is that when you've been the victim of injustice, you kind of get it. You go, oh yeah, sin is deadly. Sin is costly. Sin is lethal. Sin is brutal. And when you've experienced it, you know what it's like. And so here's God. What does he do? He goes, how is there a way that I condemn evil without condemning the people that I love? How do I condemn evil? How do I send the message that sin is lethal, that sin is costly, that sin is deadly? But how do I do it without condemning these humans that I love? And he says, you know what? I'll foot the bill. I'll take it onto my shoulders. I'll take the death into me. I'll take the contamination and the filthiness and the injustice. I'll let the injustice rain down on my body because I can take it, I can handle it so that they can be made clean, so that they can see reality as it is, and at the same time I can welcome them, I can love them into my embrace. I'll close with a true story. True story. I mentioned to you that leper colonies didn't just exist within Israel, they've existed around the world. And in the 1800s, on the islands of Hawaii, the kingdom of Hawaii had 800 lepers, okay? And they banished these lepers to an island called the island of Molokai. It's a small island. And here there are 800 lepers. And there's a priest from Belgium, okay? A follower of Jesus, a Catholic priest. And he's in Hawaii, and everybody's kind of getting their parish. And he volunteers, he says, I want to be the priest to the island of Molokai. And people go, that's a horrible, contagious disease. It's awful. Going there is virtually a death sentence. And Father Damien, he knew it was a death sentence. He knew Father Damien called the island of Molokai a living graveyard. But he volunteered to go there, and there to those lepers, he fed them with his own hands. He cared for them. He visited them. He hugged them. He cried with them. He prayed with them. He told them about the love of Jesus. He actually said, Jesus shed his blood for these lepers, and if I can't heal them the way that he did, I can at least serve them. And he served them, and then eventually, like clockwork, he knew it was going to happen. One day, he got contagion of leprosy. And he wrote in his journal, he said, I am gently going to my grave. It is the will of God, and I thank him for letting me die of the same disease and in the same way as my lepers. I am very satisfied and very happy with my love. He too is a divine love. He said, if I can't heal them, then I can at least comfort them. Well, here's one more amazing thing. I mean, if all of that isn't incredible, he was buried there, but eventually Belgium wanted his body back because he eventually became a saint, and they wanted his body to be taken back and buried in Belgium. But the colony that still existed on Molokai, they begged and they begged and they pleaded, and they eventually were able to keep just his hands. His hand, his right hand for sure, was buried on the island of Molokai. And want to know what the leper said? These were the hands that he touched us with. And that's the touch of Jesus. And maybe you're here today and you feel excluded, or you felt, maybe the church has hurt you. Maybe you felt trampled on. Maybe you felt like an outcast. Maybe just at school, your friends, you always never fit in. Maybe at your workplace, you always just feel like, man, I'm not part of the group. Like nobody sees me. Maybe you just sense that brokenness within you. But I want you to know Jesus, he loves you. And although the church isn't perfect and it's flawed and it's fallen, I want you to know true followers of Jesus, they love you too. And I want to invite you to let Jesus wrap his arms around you, to welcome you in his embrace, to let him touch you. Would you pray with me? Father, I pray that people would see you, IRL. They'd look at you in this broken world and all of its complexities and all of its pain and all of its dysfunction, and they'd see this is how you moved into the world. You moved in action. You moved in compassion. You moved in sacrifice. We're going to take communion right now, and we'll be taking of the body and the blood of Jesus. But I want to say two things to you. One thing is this. Maybe this sermon has touched you. Maybe you've just gotten a little glimpse of the character of God. And I want to invite you to act on that. And there's two ways you can act on it. Maybe you're already a follower of Jesus and you feel moved, you feel touched. Maybe you're not. And if you're not, or maybe you've wandered and you want to come back, there's a little green card on your chair. And on that green card, you can say that you want to get baptized, that you want to give your life to Jesus, that you want to enter into community, that you know you need other people in your life to touch you, other people to be there with you. So you can fill out that card and indicate that you want to get baptized. We got to baptize some people on Easter. It was beautiful. It's a symbol of being just totally drenched, totally dunked in the presence of God and in the love of God. And then the second way you could respond, maybe you've already been baptized, is that we're going to have our prayer team come up right now. And we'll have the prayer team on the sides. And maybe you just need a hug. Maybe you just need a hug like that leper. Maybe you just need someone to cry with you, to pray with you. Maybe you can tell them, man, I've just had a horrible week. My life's a wreck. There's people who want to hug you. There's people who want to pray with you. There's people who want to be your friend. But let's take communion and let's worship together right now.